Welcome to a special episode of Planet Possible. We are planning for our new season, but whilst we do, a topic came up in the international news that we really wanted to cover, so I'm delighted to be bringing this audio special to you. I'm Niki Roach, and alongside being a passionate advocate for all things water and environment, I'm a fellow of CIWEM, which is the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management. And our members, in over 90 countries, are professionals with a breadth and depth of expertise in the topics that are shaping the future of our planet. So let's get started, and in today's episode we're taking Planet Possible to South America and to Uruguay in particular. You may have heard in the global media over the last few weeks that Uruguay has been facing the longest drought the country has ever recorded in its capital, Montevideo, leaving the city almost completely dry, and the Paso Severino reservoir supplying over half the country's 3.4 million people at 2.4% capacity back in June. This is especially fascinating, I think, for a country that in 2004 enshrined access to water as a fundamental human right in its constitution. So to help us understand more about how Montevideo got here, what's happening now, and crucially, what lessons we can identify, I'm joined by a fantastic guest, a Uruguayan researcher and a professor at the University Centre of the Eastern Region of the University of the Republic, Mariana Meerhoff. And Mariana is an honorary associate researcher at Aarhus University and a member of the advisory board of the South American Institute for Research and Education in the Sustainability and Resilient Sciences. And she's also a winner of the L'Oreal UNESCO Women in Science Award. So in my best Spanish, hola Mariana, bienvenido a Planeta Possible.
Hola, Niki. Many thanks for the invitation. It's fantastic to be part of this.
I'm delighted you're joining us. So, Mariana, the stats that we've heard from Montevideo earlier on in this winter, as it has been for you guys, were stark. You know, a reservoir at 2.4% capacity in the middle of winter, millions having to use bottled water, health warnings for vulnerable groups not to drink the tap water because of the high levels of sodium because it's being mixed with brackish water. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening in Montevideo right now?
The reservoir has increased because we had some rains, some quite massive rains in the last couple of days, which were very expected because now we are out of La Niña and we are already in El Niño, and that means in Uruguay lots of rain. But it hasn't started until now, this rain. So now the reservoir is back to 15-20% of its level. So the situation is much better. Still, the state water company called OCE, so as you said, the water is a human right in Uruguay and it's provided by the state. So that's important for the audience to know. So the state water company is still mixing with brackish water, but in a much lower proportion than it used to be a few weeks ago. So the water level reached down to 1%. Even at that moment, it was declared water emergency. So that was officially declared by mid-June when that level was reached, and when the predictions for rain meant that the water was going to be out. So we were going to run out completely of fresh water in 2 days. So that was when the government decided to call it a water emergency, and that allows the government to do certain actions in a fast way or bypassing some bureaucracy or some legal aspects that need to do normally. So, for example, one of the measures that was taken was to bring water from another river and to create this massive pipeline from a river called San Jose to Santa Lucia River, which is the river that fills this reservoir. So in a month or so, all the works were done. It started to work this week. And that is not without environmental consequences, because it could be an increase or an exchange of species that would normally not be together because they belong to different watersheds. So it could be problems for invasive species, cyanobacteria blooms. And on top, this pipeline is crossing wetlands that are super important for Montevideo. These kind of measures, which are extremely dramatic, were done and were decided too late. So it would be nice, or it would be better if these things were discussed and analyzed properly before, because this drought is now 3 years. And of course, the severity of the drought got much, much worse in our summer. So that was December. As from December, there was no rain and very serious heat waves that were provoked by climate change. So it's a fact now. So that these heat waves are a consequence of climate change acting on top of, let's say, normal climatic variability, such as La Nina, another event that had produced the drought as it was. It was a normal, let's say, normal drought of 2 years until December. And then we have these heat waves that made the drought being the worst ever that's happening for several months. So from the academia, we're saying, well, we have this situation. Of course, it was very, very difficult to predict because it's a combination of factors. And climatologists are saying this was very hard to predict. But that's the situation where we are living. That's the world we're living now. So climate is very hard to predict. And then we need to be prepared for the consequences. So we need to have longer term plans. So it took by surprise a large part of the population and even the policy and the political sectors. They were all hoping and expecting the rains. And then the measures were delayed until it was too late. That's our opinion from the freshwater ecologists in the country. We're saying, well, there were warning signs, not just for the drought, but for the deterioration of water quality all across the country. And we have been saying for years now that we need to do something. We need to stop the deterioration and the degradation of the environment because we are putting our freshwater ecosystems into a very risky situation. They are very vulnerable. They have lost their natural resilience and the ability to cope with these external factors such as heat waves or the massive extraction of water for production. So we have these weak ecosystems and we are asking them too much. We ended up then for almost 2 million people having non-potable water for months. So water was still, let's say, drinkable. That's a euphemism that was given and used sort to say that people in health risks for different reasons, such as high blood pressure, pregnant women, children, undernourished population, they shouldn't drink this water. And then there were some measures taken, such as providing families of low income with money to buy their own water, which is, in my opinion, against the spirit of our constitution, where the state has to provide potable water for all the population. So this was left in the hands, let's say, of the economic situation or the will of people. So many families didn't know why they have this extra few pounds, let's say, in their account that was meant to buy water for their children, for example. So then there were many protests. People concerned the messages could be confusing when you have non-potable water, but you still receive the message that it's drinkable. So it's a very, very unique situation that there are many lessons there if we want to learn from it.
I mean, that's fascinating. There is a lot in that. Let me just recap a little if I can, just to make sure I've understood. So state-provided water started to be blended with brackish water, in essence, so salty water. So still being provided through the taps, but with a kind of health notice to everyone saying if you are young or pregnant or unwell or elderly, you shouldn't drink it, but you can. So there's confusion about the messaging. And then the more vulnerable in society were provided with some financial relief to go and buy bottled water, but again, some lack of clarity. So the water never stopped flowing, but the quality of that water changed. And then at the same time, your water resources, you've started to do what sounds like some quite major investment in engineering solutions, but without necessarily having the time to understand the perhaps unintended consequences on the environment of doing some of those things. So whilst volume might increase, there'll be other challenges. What's the kind of public response? You talked about there's been some protests, but what's the lay of the land at the moment, Mariana?
There are mixed feelings because this situation, it immediately got political. Different parties started blaming each other. So the current administration is blaming the previous administration for not constructing another reservoir in the watershed of the river that it's feeding Montevideo and the metropolitan area. Because there was a plan to build another reservoir to back up Paso Severino reservoir. And this was not done, but it was everything to do it was ready. Let's say the plans, all the engineering parts, but it was not done. And the previous administration kind of passed it into the current one. But the current government decided to go into another direction and leave that in the freezer and start a new project to treat water from Rio de la Plata. Controversial project because it's putting in private hands the treatment of water from Rio de la Plata as a backup for the Paso Severino reservoir. So there are lots of discussions on that. And then we freshwater ecologists were saying that that's not going to solve the problem because Rio de la Plata has in that area where they plan to put this treatment plant, it's very brackish still. And this is not going to remove salt from the water. So we're going to be in the same situation as we are now. Plus, it's an area with lots of cyanobacteria blooms, very recurrent blooms of toxic cyanobacteria. So this is not the right place, it's not the right solution. The solution is to protect and improve the water quantity and quality in our main watershed. Backing that up with data and with decades of research, I believe this is a philosophical thing also. We have the tendency to use and destroy. So we use a watershed, and when the quality is deteriorated at the point that we cannot use it anymore, we leave it, this unused infrastructure, and we don't restore, we move to the next. That's not what we have to do with the environment. These are our common goods. They are protected by our constitution, and that should be a priority. So water for life, water for nature, that should be a priority. So all these projects are coexisting in the political arena, and then these parties started blaming each other on who was responsible for this. And I think the political system has wasted very valuable time discussing these, let's say, minor things when we have this huge issue and we need to be united and acknowledging the situation. I think most actors are just hoping that the current rain is going to solve the problem. And of course it will solve the problem of having more fresh water, but it's not solving the real crisis that we are living with. And I think the public, it's divided. So some people are very concerned what's happening with climate and what's happening with our environment and with our resources. Other part of the public is concerned about who is providing water, if it's still public or if it's going into private hands, and who is in charge of securing water, if it's own individuals and depending on their economic situation, or is the state as by law should be. So there are all these different conflicts. And also Uruguay is a very politicized society. So depending on which party is saying what, also the positions get divided. So it's a very interesting from a sociological point of view as well. And I think now people are more relaxed. People want to believe that the rain is going to solve the problems. I think we all want to believe that the situations are easy, right? But unfortunately they're not. And it's a world situation. It's not just here, not just in Uruguay.
So just one quick question, just so I understand how the sector works. Do people pay for water in Uruguay if the state provides it?
Yes. We do pay our bill every month, as we do pay for electricity, which is also provided by the state. The state companies in Uruguay are very strong, and that was also decided by a referendum 20 years back or so. State should keep providing basic services to population. We do pay. I personally believe that the water is too cheap in Uruguay. So the bills are too cheap compared of the real cost of water. We need funds to protect our water sources. We need funds to have better infrastructure, not to lose too much water in the cities.
And are things like meters, people metered at a property level?
Yes, every house has a meter, and depending on how much we use, the cost. So there's a basic amount that is covered with the same price, that is very cheap. And if you cross that volume of water, then you start paying more and more. Of course, if you want not to drink from the tap, then you buy bottled water, mineral water, and that's made by private companies, which have the right to exploit underground water bottle it and sell it. And that was one of the measures during this drought, this crisis, was to reduce the taxes of the bottled water so people could buy it easier. But that part of the water is private, but then all the tap water and also sewage treatment, it's also made by the state. It's the same company that produces tap water, the one that is in charge of treating the black waters or the grey waters. So it's the same state company.
Mariana, you've given us a really good sense of what it's like at the moment. But more broadly, we know that we've got climate change, and that's part of this challenge. You talked about El Nino and La Nina. At a country level, how do you think you've ended up where you are? We've talked about politically insufficient or potentially insufficient investment in new sources. But more broadly, what else is going on from a kind of water resource management perspective in Uruguay that's meant that we've got to this point?
That's the most interesting or relevant scenario, is that we are living a period, I would say 2 decades, maybe a bit more, of intensification of production in the country. And we used to be a country producing free-moving cattle, and that was, so meat and leather were our main exports. And that started to move into having afforestation to produce pulp for paper production and soybean to export to Europe and to China to feed pigs mostly. These two have displaced cattle into the third place. So that meant a massive transformation of our landscape into monocultures of soy and monocultures of pinus or eucalyptus for afforestation. So afforestation started in the 90s with laws promoting afforestation and promoting the entrance to the country of these very massive paper mills from Europe. So we have a Finnish company, a Swedish company installed. And they're the largest pulp mill, the biggest in the world. And one is located on the Uruguay River, which divides Argentina from Uruguay. And a second is starting now on the Negro River that divides Uruguay by half, and another on the Rio de la Plata. So we have these huge factories that are extremely demanding of water, plus deforestation with exotic species that are also reducing the runoff in the watersheds from 20 to 60%, depending on the watershed. And that's a lot of water that is not running anymore in the streams and river and reaching the lakes and reservoirs. It's an estimated of 80% of fresh water that is used for agricultural production. So if we see all them together. So that leaves 20% for the other uses. And of course, not all this water is lost to the atmosphere. Some of that volume returns, but returns with a lower quality and with a decrease in the biodiversity of the systems. So we have a fragmentation of rivers to produce dams, to support agriculture, to produce these rural ponds, small, but by the thousands that are now crossing the country to feed the cattle, because cattle now needs to be more intensified because we have lost surface for these other uses, right? So we're still producing meat. It's still a massive production of the country, a great export, but we have less space. So that meant we need to intensify it. And that has put a lot of pressure on fresh waters, on natural fresh water, and it's decreasing the natural capacity of ecosystems to cope against climate change, heat waves, or any extra pressure that we add on the watersheds. So we have these more fragile ecosystems with less water running on them. We have ecosystems that are not connected as they used to be, so they don't receive water or organisms or genetic information from the other parts of the watershed. So they start getting sick in a way, right? So they get weakened and weakened. And on top, we are asking them to provide good water for human population. We think it's too much. We are asking in this context. We are putting too much pressure. And we are, in a way, ignoring the effects of climate change on that. And we know now, by many years of international research, that climate change will make water quality worse. So it will act synergistically with eutrophication, which is the technical term for nutrient pollution into fresh waters. And we know now that these two pressures interact with each other and will make things much worse. That means that toxic cyanobacteria will become even more frequent, even more toxic, and more widespread than at the current situation. And that means that if we need to keep water quality as it is now, which is already lower than it used to be, but if we need to keep these current levels, we must be even more serious, even more strict on what's going on in the watersheds. That's a change in mindset that we have to make. And I think we are still not doing it at a country level and also internationally.
You started to suggest, I think, what you think needs to be done. Let's put you in charge of water in Uruguay. So that's, it's probably a minor promotion, but let's do it. So we have a thing on Planet Possible called our magic wand. In fact, let me pass you the Planet Possible magic wand. What needs to be done? What would you make possible in Uruguay in order to start seeing the types of changes you're talking about happening?
Okay, and I hope you put me in that position also with funding and not at the current situation where the Ministry of Environment is like we call it the Cinderella of the government, the ministry that receives the less funding. If I was in charge, I think there are several measures. One, and the first, could be to name the main watershed, this Santa Lucia River watershed, to make a priority. And that's one thing that is possible by law. We do have the potential to declare different freshwaters we name it in different classes according to the main uses. Funny enough, that river is not considered as a provider for water consumption as the main use. It's not. So the main use officially is agriculture. The first thing I would do is to protect the sources, and human consumption should be priority. Next to nature, so nature needs water. We need environmental flows that we need to establish. We don't have that yet for the country. It's not clear how much water is the minimum that needs to be running free in order to keep ecosystems alive. So protecting priority watersheds would be my number one policy. And to do that, I would need, of course, political will, and I would need funds, because that would mean to say that the agricultural business should stop. And to do that, probably I need to buy the lands, restore forest, restore grasslands, and remove agriculture, with at least from some areas of the watershed, right? The most critical, those that are needed if you want to secure water quality. Also, all these other competing activities that are decreasing flow by taking water either from industries or for irrigation, they need to be moved in a way, or they need to be secure. We have to be water smarter. We cannot just use water as it's a non-ending resource, because it ends. So the land planning has to be rechanged. So the activities that can be done in a watershed has to be rethought and changed in order to protect freshwaters, or the main freshwaters. Also, we need to have backups. It makes societies very vulnerable to have all the eggs in the same basket, we would say. And that means if we have all our water coming from one source, then that makes us very vulnerable. We have to rethink the distribution system and have perhaps a plan B and plan C located in different areas, because also we are seeing that climate is not impacting in the same way different areas of the country. So we do have different responses in different watersheds. So as we see now, this infrastructure change of bringing water from another river, that river had water at the moment where the main river didn't. We see this spatial variation, and we have to be aware of that. So we have to combine the knowledge that we have on the territory, on the landscape, and how ecosystems are working together with administration. So we have to overlap limits of administration with how ecosystems work. We have to transition into more sustainable ways of producing food in the world, not just in Uruguay, right? So that would mean to move perhaps into agroecological agriculture, organic agriculture, whenever possible. We have to eat differently. We have to think about how we use resources, everything, all the chain of impacts until we have food and water at our table. So being more aware of the environmental impacts of production and how we are affecting nature, how we are affecting ecosystem capacity to respond. So that's the resilience. That's affecting us, our life and our quality of life. So these links should be made more clear. That would be, I think, if I was in charge, that would also be a serious line of work, and trying to make people be more aware of the connection between what happens in nature and what happens in the cities. I think we are too divorced. So people in cities, we some tend to think where our food is coming from, where our water is coming from, and we think someone will take care of that somehow. And this crisis, a warning call. They say, well, we have to know what's going on.
There's some really big themes there, aren't there? Interconnecting water resources, protecting your sources, thinking about things not just from a supply perspective, but also a demand perspective, and then connecting in with food as well. I mean, we've heard very much there what you think needs to happen. What is planned? It sounds like reservoir levels are coming up slowly. There is a bit of a hope that the rain will just get everybody out of trouble. But is there more planned aside from the investment that we've heard you talk about in connecting the two rivers? Is the second reservoir planned to now be built, for example?
This crisis hasn't changed the plans of the current administration to go into this project I was mentioning before, to treat water from the Rio de la Plata as a backup. One could hope that the situation would be a call to say, let's stop and think again. Why don't we just stop? Have all the cards on the table and see what are our options, what are the scenarios for the future, and given these scenarios, what are the best solutions? That's not been done, unfortunately. We keep going in parallel. These measures like this, connecting this other river, in theory it's temporary, probably it's going to stay, that measure, because it was a big investment and things just don't get undone so quickly. And this other project of treating water from Rio de la Plata, it's still not done, so it's still in the process of receiving the projects by the private sector who's going to build that. Political actors are fighting. I think this would be a great opportunity to really stop for a moment. It's not done, unfortunately. Really hope we wouldn't miss this opportunity as a call for the future, and also as a reminder that the things that we have decided as a country as to secure water right in our constitution, which is fundamental right, there are also, together with that statement, there were measures saying that there are committees or commissions for watersheds involving the public or involving NGOs, involving academia, involving local managers. So they all sit together and discuss what's going on in the watersheds, what needs to be done. These have been working very nicely, and I think there are spaces of public participation that are crucial, and we need to care for them. We need to secure these places where people discuss and connect to what's happening in their territories. And that's a fantastic tool. We need to use more of that. Also, maybe you remember during the pandemic, Uruguay was quite safe for a long time. We didn't experience the death toll as other countries. And that was, among other reasons, because there was a scientist committee advising the government. What were the trends? What were the risks? And then, of course, the government was deciding what to do based on that information. I think that was fantastic. This kind of environmental crisis require for that. We need to have broader consensus. We need to hear not just scientists, we need to hear the NGOs, people that are on the ground, that are living the consequences of the land uses and the degradation of environment. In paper, we have the tools. So I think in practice, we need to empower these tools, these spaces, and get more creative, because the challenges are huge. So we really need to be very creative and bold in our decisions.
And that probably takes me nicely on to my final question for you, really. So obviously, you're a professor of freshwater ecology, you are interested in environmental management, you've worked both in South America and across Europe. Some of our listeners will be working in this space in countries all around the world. What are some of your big takeaways that you would want professionals in this space to hear from the experiences of, I guess, the last 3 years and in particular the last winter in Uruguay?
Climate change, it's a fact, extremely serious, as everyone are experiencing these tremendous heat waves all over in Europe and in the States. And of course in the Middle East, tremendously high temperatures and changes in rain, changes in storms. This is a fact. We are facing it. We're seeing it's not a future anymore. This is our present, and therefore we need to be more ambitious in our targets, and the need to protect nature as our source of food and water is crucial. We cannot waste any more time. And also that no one is really free of this. So in Uruguay, we never ever thought this would happen, because it's a country, of course we do have droughts, we do have floodings every now and then, but we never run out of water, and we never run out of, let's say, relatively good water until recently. So this can happen anytime, and we do need to be prepared. Prepare for the unpredictable. That's the take-home message in a way.
As ever, time always flies in these recordings, and the same is true today. We're at the end of our episode of Planet Possible. Thank you for joining us. I hope you found the conversation insightful. I hope it's given you something to think about in your world. You can subscribe to the pod on your usual podcast player to never miss an episode. We'd love to hear your ratings and reviews, and I'm looking forward to sharing our next season with you soon too. All that leaves me to say is a huge muchísimas gracias to Mariana.
Gracias a ti, Niki. Thanks to you. It was fantastic. Very nice conversation.
That's it, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon for season 5.
Planet Possible is produced by Bwlb. Bwlb Bwlb. The best ideas, the strongest content.